Hi, I'm Toby Vernon, a partner with Simpatico Studios and host of the Food and Agriculture channel on Simpatico TV. The global food and agriculture sector is faced with a complex set of intersecting challenges, sustainably feeding a growing population amid accelerating climate change and declining farmland and farmer populations. Each week, I host live stream talk shows featuring farmers and ranchers, researchers, policymakers, investors, and business and technology developers. Together, we're growing a community of leaders that are addressing food and ag's most vexing problems, one innovative solution at a time. And I invite you to join us in the live audience or as a guest. I'm glad you're here. Enjoy the conversation. Good afternoon, good people, and welcome to the Food and Agriculture channel here on Simpatico TV. Thanks for joining us for another great episode. Today, I'm chatting with Ethan Steinberg, co-founder and CEO of Propagate Ventures. Ethan's a startup growth expert turned soil health geek, in his words, who's focused on turning big ideas into reality. Ethan's helped scale multiple ventures domestically and internationally, and he manages the Regenerative Economy News Hub over at propagate.com. That's propagate.org. Today, Ethan's going to provide us with an introduction and overview to the principles, practice, and benefits of agroforestry. This is a traditional method of food, fiber, and fuel production that he hopes will return as a cornerstone of the new global agriculture system. Ethan, it's great to have you with us today. Thanks so much for taking the time to join me. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
Great. We're gonna start here, I think, with just sort of a broad, sort of 30,000 foot view of agroforestry here on the channel. We talk about all sorts of agricultural systems. As I mentioned in the run-up, this is, agroforestry is a traditional approach to food, fiber, fuel, building material production, and tell us more about that. Tell us about what agroforestry is, why we should even care about it.
Sure. I'm happy to do that. Agroforestry is the integration of fruit, nut, and timber trees in row with an existing agricultural system. So this is like trees and livestock, or trees and row crops, trees and specialty crops. The key here is that you're creating diversity in a way that's manageable from a agricultural production perspective. The benefits behind agroforestry and why we talk about it, why we focus on it, really comes down to economics. Agroforestry can increase profitability for farmers by up to 60%. And that's as compared to, say, like a monoculture wheat system and like a timber stand. If you were to combine those, integrate those systems, you're going to increase profitability. And to like boil it down in a really simple science here, it's just, you have the opportunity to take advantage of vertical space, right? Trees grow up rather than out. And when you're dealing with fruits, nuts, and timber, you have food materials that have markets that we're all familiar with. I'm sure plenty of the folks who joined us today have like eaten an apple fairly recently. It is also that time of year.
Thankfully.
Thankfully. That's one of like I love the fall. It's got to be one of my favorite times of the year. Particularly because you get to harvest a lot of the tree crops. And so in integrating fruit, nut, and timber trees, you get the economic benefits. Think about diversifying income on farm, and you also get all the ecological benefits. And this is where the sustainability in agriculture and how do you craft solutions to climate change in a way that's easily accessible. I think most folks would probably agree planting trees is good. So kind of break that down on why is planting trees good. They sequester carbon, they increase biodiversity, they help retain water, and mitigate nutrient runoff. So like the dead zone in the Gulf, that is in part due to nutrient runoff in the Mississippi River, in that watershed. So those permanent root systems are basically, you got carbon coming out of the sky. It's being turned into trees. It's being turned into the tree's branches and trunk, as well as something called root exudates. That's basically carbon turned into sugars, pumped into the soil through the root system of the tree.
Yeah.
All that sugar gets all the life active in the soil, microbes and fungi, and that's what you want to help store carbon and really create a thriving ecosystem. And that's what helps retain water and retain things like nitrogen and phosphorus, because you've got that life in the soil that
you're stimulating that soil biome.
Exactly. I mean, we get to use biology to do it, and we get to kind of play with what I like to joke around is million-year-old technology, which is trees.
How novel! I love it.
Yeah. There was once a day we used to joke, when we started Propagate, of, hey, sure, we're a biotech company, but maybe that'll get people interested. But fast forward, I'm not too worried about that.
You're using your ancient technology, native ancient technology. So, just to make sure that we have it right, you're saying that this is a system that's compatible with horticultural crops, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not looking at a binary here. You're not suggesting that it's either an agroforestry system or a horticultural food production system, right? That's right.
The approach that is so interesting about agroforestry is that it's a holistic, integrated system.
Mm.
So just like you pointed out, it's not binary. It's not one or the other. It's where can trees provide the appropriate solution to solve a pain point on farm?
Yeah.
And there's sort of multiple variations here of agroforestry. There's the very integrated systems where, say, every 100 feet you have a row of trees, say a timber tree,
Mm-hmm.
and then in the alleys between those rows you'd have something like wheat.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's a form. Other forms, silvopasture, which has gotten a lot of attention because of the ecological challenges with meat production. So one of the lovely things about planting trees at really wide density, you basically picture it this way: you've got cattle grazing in the understory of trees at really wide spacing, kind of similar to what I said, we'll start at 100 feet per row. So what you have when things like that happen is you provide some ancillary benefits to the cattle. So from the economic perspective, you're reducing the heat and wind stress on cattle, which basically means you have happier cows.
Yeah. So instead of putting them out into a CAFO situation, they've got water, they've got shade, they have open forage. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Exactly. And think about it this way: I don't want to be standing in a hot field in Georgia in August. It's toasty. I would love some shade.
Yeah.
Cattle probably want the same thing, right?
That's right.
I'm sure. I guess if I was a cow, that would be how I would think. Why not? And there's plenty more available food from that perspective. So there's some direct benefits that way. Now, kind of to broaden the scope a little bit, where you have waterways through a farm, creeks or rivers or whatever they may be, if you think about planting 20 yards on either side of where that water is, you have what's called a riparian buffer.
Yep.
So planting trees next to those waterways can help reduce that nutrient runoff, and you can plant species that also have some ability to harvest, like a perennial berry.
Mm-hmm.
Like elderberry is
elderberry, pawpaw.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And elderberry is great. I'm sure folks are probably buying it on the shelves right about this time of year as we get into that runny nose season. And it's an immune booster. So there's direct markets for these things, and it creates income on farm while also bringing some of those ecological benefits to the table.
Yeah, that's great. Love being able to stack these functions, stack the the productivity benefits. So, mentioned silvopasture. Any other different sort of approaches to agroforestry worth talking about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the three main ones we typically work with is going to be silvopasture, alley cropping, which is going to be trees and row crops, most likely, as well. And then lastly, what we kind of call like orchard bands, and that can be stretched to like part of the farm where you just have like a small band of orchard crops, say like maybe apples or a nut crop like a chestnut or a timber stand. Riparian buffers count here as well as windbreaks.
Nice. We think a lot of times, so we've already talked about this not being a binary scenario, either tractor farming or agroforestry. Sounds to me though like farmers need to be considering new capital. They have to acquire new equipment and retool systems. Tell me about what the implementation, what the agroforestry execution end looks like.
Yeah, I'll kind of tell you how we work through it, because I think you're right. There are definitely questions for both farmers and investors who would want to get plugged in here of understanding the nuances and the details operationally, how to maintain and be successful with agroforestry. The way that we approach it is we have a software product that analyzes costs, revenues, yield projections, labor assumptions. It's effectively the economic insights that a farmer is going to ask for so they can confidently manage an agroforestry system. Now, that lends over to understanding where are the gaps from a project development or project management perspective that we can help bring those resources forward so that operations and maintenance on the farm are successful. And these are things like, what nursery can I call on? Or do I need different equipment or fencing? Or what inputs do I need? Where do I buy mulch? I mean, you could imagine some of those components that come together here. And we want to make that all easy for the farmers. And then that also reduces risk from an investment perspective, because we know the resources are in place to ensure success. And that's what we want. We want our farmers to be successful, and we want our trees to be mature and producing and to be thriving and having many pounds of apples year over year, for example. So, and then the last and final component that we put our energy into is making sure that the financing is brought forward so that there's capital available to go deploy these systems. Frankly, we've learned a lot and pulled learnings from successes and failures of the solar industry, of how that deployment of the solar industry has developed over, say, the last 15 years. Roughly like 15 years ago, banks weren't really engaged in investing in solar. Now, you fast forward to today, most banks globally have solar assets, and the sort of investment opportunities in solar are thriving. What we want to see as a business is the opportunity to make that possible for agriculture with agroforestry. Essentially, say agroforestry as a bankable asset class. And just like solar, solar panels on farmland are going to be producing electricity. That's another income stream. There's an investable opportunity there. Now, when you think about trees, sure, the timing is a little bit different because you have to plant them and wait for them to mature.
Sure.
But you plant those trees and then you have fruit, nut, or timber, which have clear markets. And so that's sort of increasing the income stream and creating that opportunity for investment is also pretty clear. Like, we know there are clear markets for timber, et cetera.
That's right. So tell me about what does a farmer need to, what are the baseline parameters for even considering integrating an agroforestry system into a farm? What kind of land access is necessary? Site and situation, geography.
Sure. Yeah.
a lot. Big question. No,
No,
pressure.
it's okay. It's a good question. Yeah, to kind of just to approach this holistically for a second. Um, I'll say this: I am a huge fan of trees, and I will be the first to point out trees may not always be the perfect solution for every climate. Like a grasslands environment or um, a desert or whatnot. Like
Sure.
trees require water and more so than other crops in plenty of cases. And so you are looking for areas of the country where the way that we kind of think about it is if humans were to stop touching the land, what would the land return to? And there are places in the US that it would return to a forest. Most of the East Coast looks like that. Parts in the middle of the country, if humans stopped messing with the land per se, it would return to a grasslands environment or a prairie. Other parts of the country that will return to like an oak savanna. And so there are, having an understanding of what the land would do in its sort of bioregion and its climate is part of that decision that we have to work through on our end.
Yes. So does that mean that you all as a business have a geographic focus?
Yeah, we do. So I'm going to draw I'll draw a big square on the US map right now to sort of help.
Please do.
Kind of wish I had like a big whiteboard for you, but next time.
This will help challenge our mental maps.
That's right. That's right. So Burlington, Vermont to Washington, D.C., over to Nashville, Tennessee, up to Chicago, and back to Vermont. You can sort of imagine that big square on the map. That's our it's a huge part of the country. Don't get me wrong.
That's right.
That's our sort of primary zone that we're working with.
Yeah.
And there are many different types of agricultural systems. I mean, you get nearer towards the Midwest, you have different acreage size, like average size of farm, total acreage, which is different than what you have in, say, the Northeast in New York, for example.
Right.
Different crop types, you have different climates. I mean, for the most part, they're similar, but you do have different nuances there.
Sure.
And so different crops are applicable, but overall, agroforestry systems with sort of those finite changes in terms of how they're implemented and managed, that's all based off of geography and local climate.
That map makes perfect sense. I mean, as you mentioned, if we had either never shaped the land the way it's shaped now, or we just up and left, basically we'd be looking at a reforested Atlantic coast, essentially, right? So you've talked about crop diversity opportunities here, and we've talked about what may or may not happen if we change the land. And talk to me about crop selection in the context of rapidly changing climate. I mean, how's Propagate selecting species and maybe even designing projects to plan for a 40, 50-year horizon?
Totally. Yeah, one of the key things here that's really important to point out is the holistic context of our farm partners, their goals, their management philosophy, the things they're passionate about and interested in. At the end of the day, they're the ones sort of on the front line of managing their farm. And so their context plays a big role in terms of that crop selection.
Yeah.
From sort of the crop types that we look at, I mean, generally, because you have like zones changing, hardiness zones, if folks
are familiar with that,
those sort of changing. I mean, basically what's happening is it's getting warmer further north. So we're looking at crop types that would otherwise have some resiliency there, that they're crop types that are going to be applicable across multiple zones. And so even if a zone does change, that those crops are still going to be able to weather that change in climate. And these changes in climate are like on natural time systems, not on like human time scales. So like you're talking like double digit years, not 2 years type of thing. I think things are changing rapidly, and over the scope of a 50-year period of time, there's a lot to consider. And so, a lot of it boils down to the type of equipment farmers have. If they do need new equipment, that's part of that analysis. Access to markets plays a big role here. One of the
Tell me about that. Tell me about that. I want to, that's a big geography that we're looking at there. Are the market instruments and mechanisms in place already? Is processing and distribution already in place for I think you might like chestnuts, from what I understand. Is the Atlantic coast ready for an influx of chestnuts over the next 10 years?
I hope so. I certainly hope so. I guess it could be, like if you go back historically, the East Coast was basically like a chestnut, oak, hickory forest. Yeah. And then what happened was settlers arrived, they brought a blight with the chestnuts, and that for the most part killed most of the trees. And then you have some pretty stunning like Victorian homes built out of chestnut wood, which from an architecture perspective is pretty awesome. But from a like
deforestation perspective,
it's a little different, right?
Yeah.
So there's some hybrids being developed nowadays, and actually Chinese chestnuts that are blight resistant. And so, there's a growing market in the United States for chestnuts. There's an example here, and that's primarily driven by immigrant populations, folks from Eastern Europe primarily, as far as I understand. And so, like when we look at chestnuts, you look at growth year over year from the market, a couple percent year over year, and so that tells us that there's a steady enough market opportunity to be planting chestnuts in agricultural systems, because you have farmers on the land, they're managing those landscapes, which is a little different than other things that I'm a fan of just like rewilding, going into your local forest and just planting and whatnot, which more trees are better, right?
Carefully selected guerrilla planting, though.
Guerrilla planting. That's right. And so, I think the markets will need to develop more. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Processing and the infrastructure needs are going to be increasingly more important, and that's both for tree crops and some of these other production systems that like a cover cropping system that's going to require some of those infrastructure needs, processing, as those in the regenerative ag community, and I think others are seeing the need for a more distributed agricultural system, so you can feed more localized or regionalized food markets. These are the big cities as well as more suburban or rural areas. And that is definitely going to have a processing requirement. So I think there's big investment opportunities there, because those are like heavy CapEx items, can be, machinery. And I guess I'll also say one of the things that we see as really valuable, that another learning from the solar industry, one of the big triggers that we think was highly useful in solar was this something known as the power purchase agreement. So basically you have like somebody buying the electricity off a solar panel before the panel is installed. In short, that's a power purchase agreement.
Right.
Now to pull that same logic over to agriculture, you can think about it this way: like you have somebody, likely a food company, purchasing the crop before the tree is planted.
Right. So that gives agri-food businesses an opportunity to R&D recipes, to tee up products, to sort of stay ahead and proactively prepare for a market rather than reactively. I don't know, I don't know how the pumpkin futures trading is going right now, but anyone who who was trading on pumpkin futures 10 years ago, if that's even a thing, is doing well right now, right?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, the futures market's an interesting one. Like China launched Apple's futures market, and it skyrocketed overnight. I forget what year that was. It was a couple years back. So I think there's tons of like market viability there. The interesting thing on the forward contracts, pre-purchase agreements, like in solar is the power purchase agreement. I think the term going in the ag community is the produce purchase agreement. So on one side, for like a food company, they can invest in the resiliency of their supply chain. They can start to internalize some of those costs, which would be good for them as a business, I think. Now, on the other side of it, and this is really the key thing, is those purchasing contractors give farmers the security they need to go ahead and plant those systems.
Nice.
And that's really like the challenge, because I think oftentimes we'll chat with farmers and be like, dude, I totally get it. Like, this system is cool. I get it. I understand all the benefits. I see the value in the income streams. Like, I'm in. Who's going to buy the crop?
That's right.
We have that question. That question is asked often.
That's right. As it should be, yeah.
Yeah, as it should be. I mean, look, they're business owners and they're trying to run a financially sustainable business.
Right.
They're very intelligent in the way they approach this. And so that's security around buying those crops, who's going to buy them, when they're going to be bought. Particularly when we're asking our farmers nowadays to be like, hey, you got to produce our food, you got to sequester carbon, you got to build soil health, you got to do all these things. You got to sell it at the farmers market and sell it here. It's just a lot, right?
That's right.
And so to help remove some of those risks, those barriers to entry, is going to be really, really helpful in terms of making farmers feel comfortable, having food companies plug into the space that is going to be good for their business over time, and is going to reduce risk for investors, so we can get to a future where banks feel totally comfortable having assets like they do in solar in sustainable agriculture.
Yeah, those avenues to profitability and those sort of policy and market barriers of entry. We're just cracking the door on this, Ethan. Although we're going to have to close out this episode, you've teed us up and shown us a clear path for more exploration into agroforestry. I appreciate you joining us. If you hold on with me for just another minute, we're gonna put out the closing credits here, but I have a load of questions for you that came through in the community room that I didn't get a chance to weave in here. So bear with me. We'll close this out, and thank you for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon. Just hang on.
Awesome.
We'll close it.
Really appreciate it.
Yep.